Hey guys, in this video, we are going to discuss how to best prepare for system design interviews. Most candidates don't know how to effectively and efficiently prepare for system design interviews. If you are watching this video, you must be one of them. Most of the time, you spend practicing lead code, and then you try to give 3 to 4 weeks at the end, at most, to prepare for the system design interviews. And what is the common way most people prepare for system design interviews? Is by going through online resources like YouTube videos or different blogs or different free or paid courses. However, most of the time we just go through those resources. For example, you may watch a YouTube video, maybe skip it a couple of times as well, or you may go and read a blog about some system, or you go through some chapters on some paid courses such as mine and read the design of different distributed services like TinyURL, Twitter, Uber, etc. And that's it. However, just going through YouTube videos or reading some online blogs or go through some paid courses is not enough. Of course, it helps a little bit because you are educating yourself, you are gaining information about how to design different distributed systems. But it really does not help you in improving your overall system design skills unless you go through all the different tips that I'm going to share with you in this video. You need to understand that going through these online YouTube videos or free or paid courses would be enough if you are targeting some junior software engineering positions like L4, E4 at companies like Facebook, Google, etc. However, this is certainly not going to help you if you are targeting senior or principal or staff level positions like L5, L6 plus in these companies. You need to understand that at this level, the hiring bar is really high. And you need to understand that at this level, just having information is not enough. So you need to understand at first that what should be the format of the system design interview. I have discussed this in more detail in my previous video, which you can find here. For example, you need to understand what you need to do first during a system design interview. So the very first thing is you always start with collecting requirements. You discuss the functional and non-functional requirements of the system with the interviewer. Most of the time, interviewers did ask you about designing some service like TinyURL or Twitter or Uber. But you will also find cases where the interviewer will provide you some vague description of a problem. And then you need to figure out that what the interviewer is asking you to design. For example, the interviewer may ask you to design a system that you can use to share some tasks with your family. Now at this level, then you have to ask clarifying questions to the interviewer. And then you have to figure out what is the interviewer asking you to design. Maybe after asking clarifying questions, you come to the conclusion that the interviewer is asking you to design a to-do service, like for example, Microsoft to-do list or Wunderlist, etc. Another example is, for example, if you check the latest mock interview in my course, I have asked the candidate to design a system through which different services can share their states with other services. After asking clarifying questions, the candidate was unable to map that system to a design of distributed message queue system. So the very first step is to discuss the requirements of the system, and the requirements usually include the functional and non-functional requirements. You also need to understand that you need to give appropriate time to every step in the system design interview. For example, it does not make sense to actually spend 30 minutes of your time just discussing the requirements if the overall interview time is 45 minutes only, because then you will only left with 15 minutes to design the overall system then. So I have discussed in my previous video that I have shared before how much time you should spend at each step. So please go and check that video as well. Here I would also like to mention one thing. If you find other online resources, they actually give more emphasis on capacity estimation. But as an experienced interviewer myself, I think it's a waste of time spending 5 or 10 minutes of time doing the capacity estimation. Why? Because usually in an interview, we have only about 45 minutes. And this 45 minutes is a very limited time in which the interviewer has to evaluate the candidate. And for example, as an interviewer, when I am evaluating other candidates, I have 10 or 20 different points that I need to evaluate the candidate for. And in that case, spending 5 or 10 minutes just on capacity estimation is a waste of time. However, you will see that there are other online resources which actually give more emphasis on capacity estimation. But you need to understand that what is the purpose of capacity estimation. Let me give you an example. Suppose if you are designing a Twitter service. In a Twitter service, during the non-functional requirement discussion, especially when you discuss the non-functional requirement of scalability, the candidate is supposed to discuss with the interviewer like what would be the scale of the service, whether the Twitter service that he is going to design is only for a few thousand users or a million users or a billion users. So what the candidate need to discuss only is about the number of total users in the system and the number of active users at one point in time, so that he can come up with an appropriate design that is tailored according to the scalability requirement of the service. It does not mean that now you actually as a candidate need to spend 5 or 10 minutes doing different calculations about how much storage you require for this schema or that schema, etc., etc. It's just a waste of time. I have never seen any experienced interviewer wasting time in capacity estimation. Let me know in the comment below what do you think about capacity estimation. Do you agree with me or not? Now, after discussing functional and non-functional requirements, you are actually supposed to discuss APIs. And you need to discuss APIs of the system only if the interviewer is interested in it. And then, of course, now the question is, in what ways you should discuss the APIs. I think usually it's sufficient to discuss the APIs in terms of what I have been discussing in my YouTube videos. However, sometimes the interviewer is interested in some specific implementation of the API. For example, the interviewer may be interested in the REST implementation of the API. And in that case, he can ask you to design the APIs in terms of REST API, like HTTP, PUT, GET, POST, etc. After the API design, then you should discuss the high-level architecture of the service. And here, it is very important for you to understand that you need to discuss the high-level architecture of the service in terms of various microservices. This is 2021. So right now, if you are discussing the design of the service in terms of a monolithic service, then it will be a negative impression for you. So that's very important that whenever you discuss the design, the overall design of the service, you discuss in terms of different microservices and you discuss how those microservices interact with each other. After coming up with the high-level architecture of the system, then the interviewer may ask you to go deep into a design of a particular microservice. And then, of course, where you have to design that service, and usually in that case, you need to understand that there are different design patterns you need to follow. For example, let's suppose the interviewer asks you to design Uber. Then first of all, you will come up with different microservices in Uber, like the gateway service, the driver service, the tip service, etc., etc. And then the interviewer may ask you to design, let's suppose, the tip service. Then you need to understand always that when you are designing a service, there could be some application servers. Then apart from the application servers, there will be a data store. And there is a possibility of having a cache there as well. Now you have to discuss whether you will introduce cache there or not and why. Okay. Then as far as the data store is concerned, you will come up with a schema. You will discuss whether you will use a SQL data store or a NoSQL data store and why. And you will also discuss the pros and cons of different data stores. When you will also discuss the schema, you will also maybe discuss how you will be sharding the database and which sharding scheme you will be using. So this is the overall format or the structure of the interview that you need to understand. But now the question is, when you are going through all this online material, when you are watching a YouTube video, when you are going through some paid courses, for example, my course or other courses, how you can actually effectively and efficiently improve your system design skills. So for this, you need to follow these steps that I'm going to discuss. So the step number 1 is that you need to come up with a list of 10 or 15 commonly asked system design interview questions. For example, come up with a list of different systems like tinyurl, Twitter, Uber, etc., etc. You can see this watch list that I have, which discusses most commonly asked design questions. So once you have a list of this 10 or 15 systems, now you pick one system at a time. Let's suppose you pick tinyurl. Now you take a paper and a pencil, okay? And now, first of all, the format that I have tell you, you use that format and you go through the design yourself. So first of all, you will actually discuss what are the different functional requirements for the tinyurl service, and you will note down those functional requirements. Then you will discuss the non-functional requirements. Then you will come up with the APIs. Okay. After the APIs, you will come up with the high-level architecture of the service, just on a paper. Okay. And then you will go dig deeper into each microservices or each component in the overall architecture. Now, once you spend half an hour to 1 hour doing that, after that, then you will go and check other online resources. For example, you will check my video on tinyurl design, that how I have designed tinyurl service. Then you also check maybe 2 or 3 other YouTube videos as well. If there is a paid course like mine, you go through the chapter of designing tinyurl on it. And also, maybe some other course if you have bought, you also go through the chapter on the design of tinyurl in that course as well. And you compare every course with what you have done on the paper, and you also compare every course with other courses. For example, you go through the chapter on the design of tinyurl in my course, and you compare it against the chapter on the design of tinyurl in some other paid online course. Or you check my video and check, okay, what functional requirements I have discussed and what functional requirements other YouTube video has discussed. How I have designed the service and how the other video has designed the service. And you try to think about which approach is better. Why I'm doing like this, why the other person is doing something different in his or her video. Try to think about the pros and cons of different approaches that you see. Only by comparing different approaches that you see in different YouTube videos against yourself and with each other, you will be able to improve your system design skill. Because once you do it a couple of times, you will start highlighting the pros and cons of each approach. And this is very important if you are especially targeting senior or principal level software engineering positions, because in those positions in the interviews, it's all about discussing trade-offs. You have to discuss different approaches and the pros and cons of those approaches. And the only way to come up with the pros and cons of those approaches is if you are yourself, while you are preparing for the system design interview, is comparing the pros and cons of different approaches that you find in different YouTube videos or different online resources or courses. Then the third step that you should do is that there's a famous saying that you only learn from your mistakes. You never learn from your success, you only learn from your mistakes. So you should try to learn from your mistakes and also the mistakes that others have made. And for this, there are many system design mock interviews that I have in my course. And those mock interviews are actually not friendly mock interviews. I have tried to make those mock interviews as real as possible. In some of the mock interviews, I'm actually grinding the candidate. In some other mock interviews, I'm actually interviewing in a very passive mode. In other mock interviews, you will find me very aggressive. I have tried to actually give you examples of different approaches that different interviewers use. And then in those mock interviews, go through each step, what the candidate is doing. What do you think, what he or she did good, and what do you think, what could have been better in those interviews. Try to analyze those mock interviews. And this would be another way for you to learn how to actually tackle system design mock interviews. If you have not bought my course yet, still there are 4 or 5 mock interviews that you will find in this YouTube channel. So I would ask you to actually go through them and try to do what I have mentioned just right now about them. In this way, you will be able to improve your system design skills. And then, of course, the fourth step is to actually ask your friends for mock interviews. And it will be better that when you are doing the mock interview, you also record that session so that you can go later on and check how did you perform. And then the fifth step is you just go and give interviews. But now the important thing is that, let's say if you are targeting Facebook or Google, don't go and just give them interview there first time. No, first you give 3, 4, 5 interviews in different other companies where you don't want to work and see how things goes. And of course, in the end, once you give interview to your ideal company and you got a rejection, don't be depressed. Take it as a learning experience and try to improve yourself the next time. So I hope you must have found these tips very useful. If you find this video useful, then please do like the video and do add a comment below. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do subscribe. I will be adding more videos in the future as well. Thank you and take care.